Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Exchange. I'm Tom Lenfestey, your host, and super excited again to be here on another episode talking about everything buying, selling, growing, improving your law firm or your business for that matter. And today is really an exciting day, one, because I have a good friend of mine as a guest today, which is going to be great to kind of go through and do that. But also, I think we're talking about a very interesting topic. We're talking about identity, leadership, and really the impact that those, I believe, have on allowing owners to have a law firm that outlasts them, right? So I'm excited to welcome our special guest, Jenny Isgett. Please, thank you for showing up today and participating with us. Just so everybody knows, Jenny is our guest who is someone who knows what it takes to lead at those highest levels, and more importantly, how to transform organizations from the inside out. She's an attorney, which we'll talk about. Jenny and I actually went to law school together, so we've known each other for a long time. But she's an attorney. She's a former Fortune 500 senior exec, and now a certified coach, speaker, and the owner of No Limits Coaching and Consulting. And here's what makes Jenny's work, I think, so impactful is she helps companies and law firms move from misalignment and bottlenecks to really clarity and execution. Please welcome Jenny Isgett. Jenny, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Tom. I'm so glad to be here.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to jump into it because, again, as we were talking about pre show, we've known each other for a while, but I really wanted to kind of first dive into your history because I think, Jenny, you have a very unique perspective as well, coming from law school, out into working with the Fortune 500, right? Getting to this point now where you're out helping other businesses in this coaching consulting world. So, for those listening, give me that background. How was your roadmap that you went from law school coming out, bright-eyed lawyer to where you are today and kind of your history to get there?
Yeah, so I started out doing real estate closings, commercial real estate closings, and then went to work for Fortune 500 title insurance company and rose up in the ranks to senior leadership. And, you know, like you and your practice started to notice that similar challenges kept popping up for clients. And so at first I started addressing some of those just to add value for the clients. And then I realized, I'm really passionate about this. This really gets me fired up when I can work with people and unlock their potential and help them really thrive. And so last year I made the leap, and yes, we can do it. We can change our identities and dive into other professions. So I went from, working from a large corporation to entrepreneur. Yes, well, I mean, when you think about it, if you are the leader and you're the key person in that role, and the entire organization is dependent upon you, it creates fragility for the organization. And I like to use the example of Steve Jobs when he stepped down as CEO from Apple, and nothing organizationally had shifted, but the markets had a very strong reaction. And it was because you couldn't think of Apple without thinking of Steve Jobs on stage with his black turtleneck. They were so just intertwined. And I think that's just one really good example of where having the firm's identity associated with a single person can be detrimental. I'd like to start with the question, who are you without your title? That really gives people pause, because most of us, and Tom, you will probably agree, we sacrificed for that title, right? We spent years earning that title. We introduce ourselves by that title. And so over time, it really does become so intertwined that you confuse the fact that what you do is not who you are. And so I like to start there by trying to diffuse, you know, who are you without that title? And we start talking about some of the qualities maybe that they have. And we start talking about, okay, well, if the law firm went away. If somebody offered you $1 billion tomorrow for the law firm, then and you were stepping away, then what qualities about you would still be true?
How do you take them from that first discussion to those next steps of, really starting to pull back and separate?
Well, for one thing, we start looking at what the risks are involved there. And so when you anchor your identity to a particular position, you're really limiting yourself because those qualities that we just talked about that you have, that are your unique gifts that you bring to that firm that built that firm, are transferable. They can be used anywhere. So, we talk about, oh, well, I'm resilient, or I like to build people, or I am really strategic, or whatever it is, those strengths that you have, when we start to separate those and the fact that they can be separate and apart from the firm, then we can help people identify how limiting that could be. And then we also talk about, like what you've just said, you're anchoring the firm to you as an individual, a finite person who, will be limited in some way at some time. And so we start sort of evaluating those risks and talking about what are the possibilities if you're not anchored to that identity. Yeah, I think a lot of people tie their value to being needed. So when you start talking to them about stepping back, then that just feels like it's self-erasure, self-elimination, because they have been that key person for so long.
And that's where I want to go. Jenny, you're a lawyer, are you? A lawyer? I mean, do you call yourself a lawyer today? Right? Yeah, but also you don't practice law, do you? Right?
Yeah.
Because and what I mean by that is this was, as I talked about this with so many people, this was a hard thing for me because when people ask me what I did as I moved away from the private practice of law and started the law practice exchange, there's this part of, well, I'm an attorney and I'm a CPA, right? Like that's the easy default. And they're like, oh, what kind of law do you practice? And I'd have to say, well, I don't really practice anymore, right? And you'd have to go through this explanation to get to really what my identity should have been. That I told them is, hey, I help lawyers buy and sell law firms. That's what I do, right? I started a company that does this, but I didn't go there. So like I went through my own having to go through the emotional check of I worked pretty hard. You said we worked hard. You worked probably harder than me. I think you got better grades in law school. So overall, from that aspect, but the goal is like you work hard. There's a professional reputation, right? There's state regulatory, like state bar. You're trying to keep up with everything. But the reason I say that is I had to go through my own. I don't know if you've had to go through that path as much of, from private practice to in-house, right? And then to corporate world to now you're advising and consulting on this of, yeah, I mean, it is hard.
It is hard. I mean, there's a certain, like I said before, there's a lot of work that goes into earning that degree, and then you put a lot of time into your professional career. And, having the title lawyer does carry a certain amount of prestige. And so getting through that, like people, they take notice when you say that. And so it is something hard to overcome, but then there's also this other side of it that you could explore, where you find more value, where you find more peace of mind, where you finally come to terms with the fact that that title does not define you and it doesn't have to define your life. I was actually reading an interesting article recently about a nurse who witnessed over like 300 people take their last breaths, and she talks about how they all had these sort of common themes, and one of them was, hey, they weren't upset about giving up possessions or status. Like the things they missed the most were things like, their dog's breath, or hearing the birds chirping outside, like things that didn't cost anything. And they talk about having taken those for granted. And I think, putting some time and effort into what's really important in your life and letting go of having to have that title as one of the most important things, and knowing that one day when you're taking your final breath that you want to look back and not have regret. You want to feel that you have truly lived your life. And so I think that that's a real part of the evaluation. Yeah, I think for people to make an investment in talent, if you will, in talent development or professional development, however you want to phrase it, it's really hard to put a dollar value on that. And so, what I like to ask people is, what is the cost to you if you don't make the investment? And so, there are so many valuable things to investing in your people and developing people and developing someone to take your place that have this trickle effect that could either, not only do they increase loyalty for your firm, but you are now empowering these people to give a better and more enhanced client experience. You are building something that can attract talent to your firm. You are giving a reason for people to stay at the firm. And when you start thinking about the opposite of that, when you have employee turnover, when you have a less than stellar client experience, when you have people who don't feel invested in, what are the consequences to you for that? And so I encourage people to think about it that way because it is hard to put a dollar amount on the investment you make in the people that work for you.
But I could tell you from a sale succession process, that's where so much of the value that a buyer is looking at it is going to place on it, right? Because if you're an owner, you're going to exit. You may transition, stay on afterwards or anything else, but you're going to exit the practice at some point. But those people that, the more you've invested in them, the more that they're part of that business value, Jenny, which you kind of brought up.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't think that people are thinking in the long term sense that it's going to create stability for that buyer. It's going to create stability and consistency for the clients of the firm. So they know that this book of business is going to continue because of the relationships that have been built and that they've got this stability and that these people who are there are going to stay, that they're all dedicated to not a person, but they're dedicated to a culture or a standard. And so they really can feel good about what it is they're buying because they know that there's that consistency.
If an owner's looking to address and kind of emotionally face that identity crisis, right? Of this firm is mine, I do everything, it's me, right? The legacy. And they're willing to really start to take steps to build leadership and invest in their people. Is there next steps after that that you really see to get law firms to grow, to get them to that true business that you work with them on?
Yes, I call it the 4Ds framework. So we document, we design, we develop, and we distribute. And so the first thing that we want to start doing if somebody's looking at an exit strategy is make sure that we're getting everything out of their head onto paper. As you mentioned in the beginning, there are so many things that they don't teach you in law school, but that are very, very important about running the business itself. And so making sure that we have all of that knowledge, experience transferred to the talent that's there or that you're trying to get there, and that you have it on paper, that you've got all your systems and processes and all of these things documented. And then if you have talent already there, the investment to continue developing that talent or recruiting the talent and having the things in place to get those people there. And then we'll just start working our way down the line, but maybe, start empowering those other people to, start delegating responsibility to them, empowering them to make decisions on behalf of the firm so that, all decisions, all authority is not centralized in one person. I mean, it's really about being proactive rather than reactive because being proactive, you're creating choices. If you're being reactive, you're waiting on this terrible circumstance to occur. In one way or another, these things are going to have to happen eventually. So either your firm's going to get sold or it's going to get shuttered, and someone either way is going to have to put in the work at some point. So I think it really is about, do you want to see what you've built and worked so hard for have the ability to be sold and be valuable, or if you don't have to retire, you can remain in that role all you want, but at some point life catches up to everyone, and do you want the doors to just be shuttered, or would you like someone to carry on your legacy?
That's right. I'm going to give myself a good test of this in a week or so, as we go on, big spring break trip with the family to see how the law practice exchange runs. So, we may have some listeners and clients and otherwise ping me and say this broke or whatever, and this didn't happen. But I think that's the big thing, Jenny, is going through this. A lot of it is take a step back and see where, you are still reliant or the firm is still reliant on you and kind of where you can start to delegate. You can start to build a little bit better system. And so it's not as like huge and worldly. I think that's the aspect. Sometimes it just seems like such a big project, but it's really just you take it piece by piece and step by step. And you kind of mentioned, you already kind of alluded to like the succession. It's going to happen at some point. Right.
Right.
So if you go to exit your firm, develop a succession plan, you can do it all really quick and intensive and everything else because it has to be done there to, pass the torch to a successor, to a buyer, or you can do it now over time, make it easy, and actually make your firm more transferable, more, ready to be transitioned, everything else. And that, Jenny, that really brings us into like talking about succession planning, which is an area I know you were working with owners quite a bit on. Why do you think owners really look at succession planning and say, yeah, it's something I'm going to do someday, but I don't need to do it today? Why is that pushed away to that future date when I know I'm going to be healthy and on this earth to potentially plan for it and do it versus it's something I need today?
I think of succession planning sort of like estate planning. So many people put it off because they just don't want to contemplate, their own, I guess, mortality.
Sure.
And that's fair, but it also, you have to consider that it leaves a lot of other people in a real bad situation. And so, I think there's risk mitigation to be thought about here, not just for your family, but your clients who you have ethical obligations to. You have your employees who are going to be left, hanging out to dry. You've got your legacy to consider. And what do you want that to be? Because if you haven't made any plans, then somebody in South Carolina, we have a receiver who's going to step in on behalf of the bar, and it's a real nightmare for them to try to figure out all the things about your law firm that you failed to document. And so I think, whether you are just starting out or if you are thinking in a few years, I'm going to retire, the key is start now, start today, and start documenting all of these things so that, there's a million stories of how this can end badly. And there's also a million stories of people who went ahead and planned for it. Making the plan doesn't mean you have to retire. Making the plan just opens up possibilities for you in the future.
I love the question, how much time should I give myself, right, before I'm going to retire? And everybody's like, oh, I heard 3 to 5 years, right? So like I should start this succession planning or this exit planning process in 3 to 5 years. And I've actually kind of alluded to the part of like, well, if you don't know what your exit plan is now, how do you know it's 3 to 5? Like you could have a practice, Jenny, that's fully reliant on the owner, that is super niche practice area, right? And is going to take 10 years to find a successor, transition over. That may be exaggerated, but overall, you may financially need way more money from the practice that's going to put you on a path like your exit plan is not 3 to 5, it's 7 to 10 because you need to earn more before you get to that point, or your practice isn't valuable enough. And so I think South Carolina's got the right approach in this, like, you should always have your exit plan, right? You should always have a succession plan. You can change it over time, but it needs to be part of your core planning for your law firm, for your business, and it helps you. Strategically, like what we've been talking about today is if you go in and start a succession plan exercise and you realize, well, my identity is tied to the firm. Okay, we should improve that. I do too much of the work. I need to probably invest in human capital in my team and my organization. Well, great. Jenny can help you with that and kind of work through it. Now, secretly, what you're also doing is you're making a more transferable practice and a more valuable practice, right? So if your goal is to exit, you may be shortening your timeline for like finding a buyer and how long you're going to have to stay on for that transition and everything else. And that's really, Jenny, the other part is I know you've been part of the transitions, right? The passing of the baton, the passing of the torch, the merger of companies or law firms. Like, where have you seen success and where have you seen kind of the failures in that transition phase?
Yeah, I will say yes. I've seen quite a few things. One thing that's heartbreaking is when people, they have this mindset that I'm never going to retire. This is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And then all of a sudden they get to that point in their life and they do want to retire. And it's really too late to build that value to be able to have something to sell. Or it's too late to develop that successor that could take over your practice because it takes time and just because you picked one person doesn't even mean that's going to work out. And so I hate that for people who come to the realization that, oh yeah, there is life after law, but then they can't retire because they've put themselves in a bad position. But I would say when it's successful, you have people who have been developing the talent. They do have a plan in place. They have documented their procedures, their systems, their processes, and they've built a culture. And so that means something that is not built around their presence being mandatory. It's a standard that the firm lives by. It's how people interact. It's behaviors that are reinforced. It's, how you, it's embedded into the fabric of your firm. So whether it's hiring people, developing talent, performance reviews, all of those things, you've embedded this sort of your core values into things. And that's something that is transferable. That's something that you can step away from and have that legacy that you want to endure and have, that firm go on and continue to thrive.
Jenny, is this all only for big firms? It sounds like you're talking about people, everything else, and of course, leading, but overall, I mean, can small firms do this as well?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a great example. So, my husband also is an attorney and has been practicing here for a long time. And, one Sunday morning, he gets a phone call that says, "Hey, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your senior partner committed suicide." Now, this is something that was totally unexpected. And so, they were a very small firm. There were only three lawyers in there at the time. But what made the difference for them and the reason they were able to continue and thrive as a firm is because that senior partner had taken the time to develop. He had given that institutional knowledge. He had, you know, passed that along. And they did have conversations about how the day to day, how you run a business and how you take care of your employees so they stay with you and those kinds of things. Again, like they don't teach you in law school. And so, that's something where it's proof that succession planning is not about retirement. It's building resilience for the unexpected. Because whether it's something tragic like that, or it's a health issue that occurs, or I mean, you never know what's going to happen in life. Just like we didn't ever think we'd be sitting here today in the roles that we're in.
Right,
And so
right.
it's really just preparing for the unexpected. And I think it's important whether you're a solo practitioner or a very large firm, there needs to be a plan in place um, for your firm.
Yeah, and I think the exciting part of, having that plan, like you said, it's not about retirement. It's not about exit, right? Everything else, which is something we talk about. But the exciting part is if you do all these things, you're building value, right? You're taking care of, like you said, your partners, your team, your clients, right? Your community, everything else. Jenny, I'm going to shift gears a little bit and ask you, you kind of have been open about working with, your own coaches, right? And kind of your own executive coach otherwise. And I think that's a key part of what I would say for law firm owners. How do you focus, like, and how do you help your clients focus on that continuous improvement for law firms, for businesses otherwise? And, that's part of where I think that coaching comes in.
Yes. Well, I always like to use sports analogies, or at least running for me. And so, just like we were talking about earlier, I mean, it's really about taking things one step at a time, but being consistent about that. So, you put these systems in place, but you have to keep working on them. They're always going to need an update. We both know we're in this really fast paced world now. Things are changing very rapidly. And so, it is really important for people to be diligent about updating those plans, updating those systems, updating the technology, all of those things that are sort of the bedrock of the firm. So you have to be diligent, you have to be disciplined, but you also, if you're training for a marathon, you're not looking at mile 26 when you're starting at mile 1. You're looking at, can I finish mile 1? Now I'm getting to mile 2, and just taking it piece by piece, and I think that just makes it so much more manageable for people.
Absolutely. Well, Jenny, this has been great. I think if I was going to kind of recap, again, identity, especially for lawyers, right, is one of those hard challenges. The other part is investing in that team and that organization to really make them truly, part of that business asset, right? And I think Jenny kind of shared that as well. And then really going to succession transitions, how those can really work. Jenny, I'd love to wrap up with some quick fire questions if you're okay. And we'll just kind of do that. All right. So I'll try to throw up some good ones. What's the best book you've have recently or read recently that you would recommend?
Language and the Pursuit of Excellence.
Okay. Okay. Language in the pursuit of excellence.
It
I'll
talks
put
about
that one
leadership,
down.
so that if you're, because what we're doing every day is leading people through language. We're not out there doing physical labor as lawyers, consultants, or whatever we are.
Awesome. One thing that you wish law school had taught you that unfortunately they did not.
Ooh, I would say that leadership doesn't mean having all the answers.
Absolutely. What's one habit you'd force every firm owner to adopt more?
Curiosity.
If a firm owner right now is listening and starting to realize that their firm might not survive without them, what's the first honest conversation that they should really have with themselves?
Where are my blind spots?
Blind spots as in what?
I'm sorry.
What kind of blind spots? Like areas that they would focus on. What are they looking for?
I would say thinking about risk mitigation, thinking about where have they put themselves in a bad spot that maybe they haven't really thought through, and what are they not thinking about. So when you were talking about earlier using coaching, the most elite athletes in the world all have coaches. Tiger Woods at the top of his game had a swing coach, a strength coach, a mental coach, all of those things. And the reason is because you have to have someone to point out your blind spots.
Yep. It's what I'm trying to reassure my teenagers. It's okay to ask for help. You don't have to know it all. All right, last question. Where can people find you? And where should they prepare for that first conversation if they're going to reach out to you?
They can find me at jennyisgett.com, and happy for people to reach out. My phone number, my email, and a request for a meeting is all on the website if you're interested. And was the question, what should they be prepared for?
Yeah, that first conversation. What should they be prepared for?
Oh, they should be prepared to have a little fun, to get curious, and maybe find out some things about themselves that they didn't know before.
Awesome. Jenny, it's been great catching up. Hopefully, it won't be another decade or two before we catch up. But I love the work you're doing, helping law firm owners, helping entrepreneurs really do this. And again, for anybody listening, it doesn't really, in our world, we talk a lot about exit planning, sale, and everything else. But this is just building a better business for whatever your path may be as next steps. And Jenny is somebody who can help you. So overall, Jenny, thanks so much for joining us. Everybody else, till the next time, and we'll see you then. Thanks.